So now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Mary Barry. Mary was the Chief Executive Officer of OurWatch, which is a national organisation to prevent violence against women and their children. She was the Chief Executive there from January 2016 to May 2018. OurWatch was established by the government in 2013 to drive nationwide change in the culture, behaviours and attitudes that underpin and create violence against women and their children. Its mandate is to stop it before it happens. Prior to that role, Mary was the CEO of the National Heart Foundation of Australia. She was the CEO of the Victoria State Emergency Services for 8 years and the CEO of the Victorian Association of Health and Extended Care for 6 years. Mary has held a number of senior executive roles in health, aged care and local government. Mary joined the Rotary Club of Melbourne in 2006, serving on the board as a director and vice president prior to becoming appointed the president in 2017-18. Mary is currently a member of the Rotary Club of Melbourne Family Violence Committee. She is committed to and passionate about the need to prevent violence against women and their children, and as part of her role on the committee is working with Rotarians to enable them to better understand the drivers of violence against women and their children, which in turn will help them to better understand how they, as individuals, can contribute to play their part to ending family violence by preventing it before it occurs. There couldn't possibly be anybody more appropriate to address this forum today, so welcome Mary Barry, please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Noel, for that introduction. And it's certainly a great pleasure and an honour to be here today and to have the opportunity to address this very important forum on family violence. And I would also like to thank Gary Higgins and the Rotary Club of Maryborough for inviting me to be here today and giving me this opportunity, and also to congratulate you on the implementation of the very successful Say No to Family Violence campaign. So congratulations to you and the community here. And I would also like to acknowledge and thank all of the people in the audience today who have worked long and hard over many, many years to keep women and children safe from violence and to support victims and survivors and advocate for greater funding and action to address this critical issue. So my heartfelt thanks to all of you who have been in this sector for many, many years when it was underfunded, under-resourced, and not really something people wanted to talk about. So hopefully from today onwards, it will become something we can talk freely and openly about. So family violence is a complex issue. It poses many challenges for people to acknowledge that it happens in our street, in our workplace, or in our community. For people living in smaller regional and rural communities, it becomes even more challenging and difficult to admit that family violence happens to people we know, love, and care about, particularly when both the perpetrators and the victims can be known by everyone, including the police, the court staff, and the relevant family violence services. Intertwined with this, of course, can be a fear that the victims or the perpetrator's circumstances will become more widely known in their community and could result in ostracism. So why is this so? Well, family violence occurs when a person or a perpetrator exercises power and control over another person. It involves coercive and abusive behaviours that are designed to intimidate, humiliate, undermine, and isolate, resulting in fear and insecurity. And until recently, family violence has been considered a taboo topic. It happened behind closed doors, and we were told it's none of our business. However, for the victims, it has caused terrible physical and psychological harm. And while both men and women can be perpetrators or victims, intimate partner violence by men against women is the most common form of family violence. It can include physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, and spiritual violence, and financial and economical abuse and control. But women can also experience violence, such as sexual assault, sexual harassment, or rape by somebody other than a partner or a family member, including a complete stranger. When it comes to violence against women, we are a country in crisis. Now, you might be thinking, I'm not sure I'd call it a crisis, but let me tell you the statistics. In Australia today, at least one woman is killed every week by a former or current intimate partner. Police get called to one domestic violence matter every 2 minutes. That's 657 times a day. Women are 3 times more likely than men to experience violence at the hands of a partner. More than 50% of women who experience violence have children in their care when the violence occurs. Women usually experience violence at the hands of men they know, often in their own homes, and often repeated over many years, if not their lifetime. This is a reality for 1 in 4 Australian women. Australian men typically experience violence from other men, and usually in public places. In Australia today, the biggest risk factor for becoming a victim of sexual assault, domestic or family violence is being a woman. I would like to acknowledge that none of these statements are implying that all men are violent or that only women can be victims of domestic violence. There is far too much violence in Australia against both women and men. And we also know that Australian men suffer from shockingly high rates of suicide, ill health, gambling, alcohol, and drug addiction. But while acknowledging that most men are not violent crime, the statistics tell us that when violent crime is committed, it is predominantly committed by men. Sexual crimes are predominantly committed against women, and both men and women are almost equally victims of physical assaults, which are almost always committed by men. When it comes to acts of domestic and family violence, the vast majority are perpetrated by men against women, women being 3 times more likely than men to be killed by their partner. And this is a reality for at least one woman every week. And it is statistics like these that have shone violence, or shone the spotlight on violence, men's violence against women. So the question has got to be, why is this happening? What drives a person to commit violence against a person they're supposed to love, or a complete stranger to rape and murder a woman? And most importantly, is it preventable? Well, to answer these questions, we need to look at the drivers of violence against women. So while we know that there is no single cause of violence against women, research continually shows that the main drivers of higher levels of such violence are attitudes and behaviours that disrespect women, have low support for gender equality, and adhere to rigid gender roles. Some may suggest that alcohol, drugs, unemployment, and poverty are the cause. However, the evidence tells us that while these factors can exacerbate violence, being poor does not cause domestic violence, nor does drinking alcohol or taking drugs. There are plenty of people to whom these characteristics apply who are not violent and never would be. The reality is that gender inequality is the core of the problem, and gender equality is at the heart of the solution. So how do we prevent violence against women? Well, the National Framework for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, Change the Story, focuses on primary prevention, which is a long-term approach which aims to prevent violence from occurring in the first place. And importantly, it's distinct from early intervention and crisis response, both of which aim to stop the violence from escalating or recurring. Primary prevention is a very important part of family and domestic violence, but we shouldn't be confusing it with early intervention in particular, which most people seem to confuse it with. It is trying to get to the root cause of the violence and stopping it before it starts. And rather than focusing on any one group or community, primary prevention works across the whole population. It challenges governments, women and men, boys and girls, to change the structures, norms, practices, attitudes and behaviours that cause this violence by challenging its underlying drivers, gender inequality and disrespect for women. Change the Story is a real opportunity to tell the real story of gender inequality and violence in the simplest way possible. I'm now going to play a short DVD, and I'll let you judge for yourself whether anything rings true for you.
This is the story of a boy and a girl. It's a universal story and an Australian story. It's a story that occurs every 2 minutes, in fact. A story that happens 657 times a day, every day of the year, and in every kind of household and every city and region across Australia. This is the biggest story behind violence against women. This story doesn't have a happy ending, because this is the story of how gender inequality contributes to the murder of one Australian woman almost every week. Sounds like a tall tale, right? Let's take things back to the start. Here's the story of a regular woman. As a girl, she gets told how pretty she is, never how clever she is, that if she wears a short dress, she's asking for it. She grows up and gets used to being harassed by men on the street. That's just the way it is. Here's the story of a regular man. As a boy, he learns that women aren't equal to men from a very early age. Even though both his parents work, on the weekends his mum does the housework while dad watches sport. When he cries about being bullied at school, his dad tells him to stop being such a girl and just punch him right back. Technically speaking, we'd say that these social norms, practices and structures have shaped both the boy and the girl, creating a society where women are valued less and men are expected to be dominant and in control. In such a world, disrespect and hostility is excused and violence against women is far more likely. But back to our story. The girl grows up into a woman, the boy grows into a man, and they begin to date. He jokes that he hopes she doesn't get fat now that we're together. She's not sure whether she should laugh. They have the same education and do similar work, yet he earns more money. He's quickly promoted, like other men in the company, while she gets overlooked. At home, she does all the household chores, and he takes control of their joint finances, seeing as he's the main breadwinner and all. When they're at the pub, he puts her down in front of his mates. His friends stay quiet. In the morning, he wakes up and blames the alcohol. And stress, he always has an excuse. When she gets pregnant, her boss says she can't come back part-time. After the baby is born, the lack of flexible job opportunities and childcare keeps her out of the workforce. She is socially isolated and financially dependent on him. He controls decision-making, and her. They are not equals. She is dependent on him for everything. So she never tells anyone that he has started to hit her. She doesn't say anything to her family or friends. She grows more isolated. She has nothing else but him, so she lives with the violence until their story ends, one way or another. This story isn't a one-off. It's a story shared by 1 in 4 Australian women who have experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or former partner. And it's a story of 1 in 5 women since the age of 15 who experience sexual violence, including rape, 1 in 4 emotional violence, and 1 in 3 women physical violence. But it's also a story that affects children. More than half of the women who experienced violence had children in their care when the violence occurred. For victims and perpetrators, violence against women is the conclusion often reached after a life lived in a society where women and men aren't treated equally. But we, you and I, can change the narrative. Better education, policies, practices, support and funding can prevent this all too common story. When women and men have equal power, value and opportunities in relationships and in society, violence against women is less likely. By nurturing caring, respectful and equal relationships, and by creating equitable and inclusive communities, workplaces and institutions, we can create a society of equality and respect, where violence against women is unthinkable. Let's change the story, because ending violence against women starts with gender equality.
Well, violence against women is a social issue, and it's deeply embedded in our culture, our norms and our practices. As a nation, we have and we can change what were once considered for many decades socially accepted norms. Just cast your minds back to when smoking on airplanes, in the workplace or in the cinema was considered normal and socially acceptable, and when sunscreen was shunned in favour of baby oil. But when government saw the costly death and disease statistics that were resulting from our behaviours and attitudes, they listened. Campaigns such as Quit and Slip Slop Slap were launched, challenging Australians to question and change their behaviours. And when we saw that particular behaviours were giving us lung cancer or melanomas, we also took action. Over the past 30 years, we have seen seismic change in population-level attitudes and behaviours to smoking, sun exposure and drink driving. And we are happier and healthier because of it. So to prevent violence against women, we need to change the attitudes and behaviours that drive this violence. We need to increase gender equality and respect in all aspects of everyday life. To do this, we need primary prevention activities to occur simultaneously where people live, learn, work and socialise. This means in our schools, in our workplaces, our sporting organisations, our community groups and clubs, through social marketing, working with the media to better report on family violence when it occurs, and by developing and influencing public policy. This multi-setting approach helps to strengthen the impact of different prevention initiatives by having a mutually reinforcing effect. So now I'm going to give you some examples of primary prevention initiatives that are currently happening. And these are things that can be adapted to any community, whether it's a small community, a large community, a metro area or a national programme. The first one is the rolling out of the Respectful Relationships education across Victoria. We now have over 1,000 Victorian government, Catholic and independent schools participating, and this includes the Maryborough Education Centre, which participated in the original Respectful Relationships Educations pilot run by OurWatch in 2014-2015. And as part of this rollout, Maryborough is a lead school on implementing respectful relationships, which includes modelling good practice and leading and mentoring 8 partner schools, including St Augustine's Primary School. We also have the development of a workplace programme, including the OurWatch Workplace Equality and Respect programme. Funded by the Victorian Government, this initiative has developed a set of standards to guide the actions workplaces can take to prevent violence against women. It includes a package of adaptable tools and resources to support and guide workplaces integrating quality, equality and respect into their practices, strategies and cultures. There is also the OurWatch web-based campaign for young people aged 12 to 19 years called The Line. This enables young people to interact with each other and discuss issues such as violence, sexuality, relationships and consent. And there's also the White Ribbon Workplace Accreditation Programme, which recognises workplaces that are taking active steps to stop violence against women, accrediting them as a White Ribbon workplace. Other programs run by Our Watch include a national media engagement program and a national sporting initiative. And I know that there are many other primary prevention activities occurring in various communities across the state. These are led by local governments, women's health centres and other community groups. And there's also sporting clubs and workplaces that are also carrying out primary prevention activities, but obviously can't list them all here today. And Respect Victoria, looking to the future, the state government, and I'm very pleased and excited about it, have recently announced that they're establishing a statewide prevention agency, Respect Victoria. This agency will work across the state to change the attitudes, social norms and cultures that lead to family violence and violence against women. It will provide expert advice on best practice and engage in whole-of-community primary prevention campaigns and activities. So the question is, what can you and your community do? So how can you get involved in primary prevention? Well, as individuals, you can play your part. This can be as simple as calling out sexist or derogatory comments when you hear them at home, in social situations, or at work. You can refrain from buying into the old adage that boys will be boys as an excuse for disrespectful behaviour towards girls and women, whether in the home, at a social setting, on the street, or in the workplace. If you're an employee, you can encourage your employer to implement a workplace equality and respect programme or an accreditation programme. If you're the owner or the boss, just make the decision to do it. As parents and grandparents, you can model behaviours that promote gender equality and not treat your sons, grandsons, daughters and granddaughters differently just based on their sex. Just think about how you speak to your sons or your daughters, your grandsons, your granddaughters. What language do you use? Just think about how you address them. And as a community, as well as individuals, communities have a very important role in primary prevention activities. And communities such as yours, with a shared ethos and interests, can have a powerful influence on the behaviour of individuals through the culture they establish. And according to the Royal Commission into Family Violence in Victoria, cultural change will not happen without community-led primary prevention action. And I believe that you as individuals and your community, having implemented the Rotary Club of Maryborough's Say No to Violence campaign, which has raised awareness of the problems associated with family violence in your community, encouraged those who knew or were experiencing family violence to speak out or to seek assistance, and it's changed the attitudes and behaviours towards offending, condoning, tolerating, and ignoring family violence in the community. You are now well placed to consider community-led primary prevention activities as the next step, which is including the whole of community. But this will not be easy. The roots of this issue are deep in our culture and our history, and many people and leaders in our communities may be reluctant to take the next step and challenge such deep-rooted values and beliefs. This goes past acknowledging that family violence happens in our community. It goes to the root cause, and it goes right to where it starts. And one of the biggest challenges going forward is for people to understand and accept that there is a strong link between sexist attitudes, telling a sexist joke, disrespect for women, or the gender pay gap to violence against women. Some people just can't see the link, don't want to see the link, or find it a bit of a stretch. Well, this is similar to the challenge faced by the QUIT program 30 years ago, when they were trying to convince people that there was a link between smoking and cancer. But the good news is that history proves, with the right messaging, the right actions, political will, and persistence, population-wide attitudinal and cultural change is possible. So, in conclusion, we know that the most common form of family violence, violence against women, is preventable and can be stopped before it starts. The impact of this violence is felt every day, and ultimately this issue damages all of us. It's not just women and girls who suffer. We are all diminished by this epidemic. And so we must all be courageous, play our part as individuals and communities, and challenge the beliefs and practices, no matter how entrenched, which justify disrespect for women, gender inequality, and violence against women. When women are seen as equal with men, violence against women will become a thing of the past. And I hope you will join me and play your part in ending this violence through primary prevention activities. Thank you.